Agent Romanoff. You miss me?
Oh yeah, Charles, we got ourselves an X-Men fan.
Captain.
Your Highness.
Jackman, big fan, Spider-Man. Hey everyone.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Film Artsy, your number one source for all things films and movies. My name is Elijah, and today we are going to be taking a closer look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The MCU has been a hugely successful series of films that most people go and enjoy. But even though the MCU is possibly one of the greatest, if not the very greatest, crossover film universe in existence, no movie series that is so intricately connected with such a wide variety of characters with different backstories can go on without having some sort of continuity errors. And if you're a regular subscriber of this channel, you know that we absolutely love the Marvel movies, but we find these tiny little errors and mistakes in the film series something more interesting that kind of gives a little bit more charm to the series as it's fun trivia that we can point out. That being said, we're taking a look at 5 of the biggest errors in the MCU. But before we begin, if you enjoy what we do here at Film Artsy, consider checking out our Patreon, link in the description down below, to get awesome perks like shoutouts in our videos, to even picking out topic ideas for future videos. If you like this channel and you like what we do and you want to be able to support our channel a little bit more, check out the link in the description below. To start off this list, we're going to be going back to the second MCU film, which is The Incredible Hulk. This movie was one of the lower performing movies in the MCU, but overall was still loved by fans. And while the obvious Edward Norton is no longer in the MCU portraying Bruce Banner thing can be said, this isn't the first time Marvel has recasted a character. We saw it with War Machine in Iron Man 2. But The Incredible Hulk definitely was a weird mixture that opened up a lot of plot holes that didn't completely make sense. And while none of them are fully earth-shattering to the MCU, they're still interesting to take a look at. Overall, this film was halfway a reboot to Hulk, but also serves as a successor in a sense, recapping parts of the origin story from Hulk 2003, but also kind of retelling the story slightly different so they don't have to redo the origin story. Like, one of the biggest key things is at the end of Hulk 2003, he's hiding out in South America, and at the beginning of The Incredible Hulk, the Hulk's already existed, he's already done his whole first rampage, and he picks up in South America. Of course, at the same time, this film was a reboot, but they're also kind of acknowledging that past Hulk film, which puts into question exactly how much of Bruce Banner's story exists in the MCU. Are they taking majority of the 2003 story or just that little intro sequence? We never really see anything or hear anything about it again in the Avengers or any other movie featuring the Hulk. With that, we also have the original introduction of Thaddeus Ross, who essentially is on the mission to hunt down the Hulk and stop him at all times, and clearly serves as the major antagonist of the Incredible Hulk, comes back in Civil War for some reason, and presents everyone with the Sokovia Accords, which is just a really weird choice for a character to do this, and it seems very out of character considering his intentions in The Incredible Hulk. It's really a completely flip-flop on the character, and the only real explanation we have for this is if they're maybe trying to set him up to be Red Hulk down the road. Otherwise, this is kind of a major plot hole because there is no clear explanation as to why this character would completely change in motives unless the writers were just trying to shoehorn a character in as a cameo to move the plot along. Number 4 comes out of Iron Man 2, when Tony Stark discovers a new element, or at least a relatively undiscovered element to the common world, which we later find out is vibranium, which is used in the creation of Captain America's shield from the 1940s. That's why we know it's been around for a while, and we also know that vibranium is one of Wakanda's biggest elements. It's really cool that we have vibranium this early on in the MCU. However, one jarring plot hole in the entire MCU is that Tony Stark didn't actually utilize vibranium at any time to make a vibranium Iron Man suit. It just seems like one of the obvious things that he would make with a suit, considering how advanced his technology is, especially in Infinity War, since he has nanobots, which are just a theorized type of technology. It would just be a real shame if we don't actually get to see a vibranium Iron Man before we would see a quantum Iron Man or something like that, considering the little hints towards it in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Number 3 comes out of the Avengers. Leading up to the Avengers, every single MCU movie introduced at least 1 or 2 characters that would eventually fight in the first Avengers film. In Thor, for instance, we got Thor, an introduction to Loki, and we also got Hawkeye. And in Iron Man 2, we got Iron Man, War Machine, and Black Widow, where Iron Man and Black Widow are in the Avengers, but even though War Machine had already been introduced and given a decent character arc, he was completely absent in the Avengers. And the only real explanation we got was in an exclusive MCU comic book that just mentions that War Machine was fighting some terrorists somewhere in the Middle East during the time of the attack on New York. But apparently Tony Stark called him and said, "Nah, don't worry about it. It would take you too long to get here," in the comic book, which seems extremely out of character, and whether you want to count the comic book as canon or not is up to you, but it just seems really odd that Rhodey wouldn't have come as soon as he could to try to fight in New York, and it also just seems really odd that they didn't even utilize his character during the fight scene in New York, considering they already had developed him and it would have been one more character to fight and have some extra action in New York. Even if the comic is canon, it just seems really weird. We didn't even get a scene of this conversation going on, and we don't even have any acknowledgement in Iron Man 3, which definitely deals with the elements of PTSD that Tony Stark has, where Rhodey also plays a major character in it and doesn't even mention the fact that the battle really happened involving his character. But who knows, maybe there's a chance they will address this one day in the future. Number 2 is a fairly quick one, but in the introduction to Guardians of the Galaxy, Gamora is introduced as the last of her kind and adopted daughter of Thanos. While the later half of that statement is true, in the Avengers Infinity War, we actually learned some pretty deep background to Gamora, including the state of her planet and what exactly happened when she got adopted. Thanos came to her planet on his mission that he's always been on to kill half the population of the universe, and Gamora's planet fell to that genocide. However, in Avengers Infinity War, Thanos makes a statement that Gamora's planet is now thriving unlike it was prior to his genocide, which essentially completely contradicts what we see in Guardians of the Galaxy saying Gamora is the last of her kind, even though half of her planet is alive and her overall planet is still thriving. And lastly, this final point actually comes out of Spider-Man Homecoming and really isn't at the fault of the MCU itself, but more what Sony did with the timeline. But more or less, for the most part, the movies that are released in the MCU take place during the year that they're released. This isn't always the exact model that's used, but for the most part, that's kind of how the timeline works. And we actually had official confirmation that the original Avengers took place in the year 2012. However, in the beginning of Spider-Man Homecoming, which takes place during the events of the Avengers, the weapons and energy found from the fight begin to get sold off into a black market, and then we get a time jump of 8 years later, which essentially would put the events of Spider-Man Homecoming all the way up into 2020, which actually doesn't even make sense because this movie clearly takes place within 6 months of the events of Captain America Civil War. Which still doesn't make sense because even in 2016 Civil War, they make a reference that Iron Man first came into fruition 8 years prior to the events of Civil War. which would then mean that either Spider-Man somehow takes place 4 years after the events of Civil War, which doesn't make sense because he's 15, which would mean that he was 11 during Civil War, or somehow Civil War takes place in 2018, but then that messes up a bunch of the timelines involving Doctor Strange, which we know happens after Civil War. And while the timeline can be kind of confusing right now, Kevin Feige actually has gone on record to say that it was a mistake in Spider-Man. Or I guess more said that time is more fluid in the MCU than necessarily having black and white dates, which is a lot better than, say, something Nintendo would do with The Legend of Zelda having some crazy split timeline. But what do you think? Leave a comment down below. Do you have a solution to any of these plot holes in the MCU? We read every single one of our comments and would love to hear your feedback. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe with notifications on, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video.
Hey, it's Gigi Hadid. For more videos like this, click here.
Hi, I'm Cara Delevingne. Please don't forget to subscribe by clicking this button right here. Boop.
Thanks for watching.